It's time for Talking Michigan Transportation, a podcast devoted to the conversations with people at the forefront of the ongoing mobility revolution. In the state that put the world on wheels, here's your host, MDOT Communications Director, Jeff Cranson.
Hi, once again, welcome to the Talking Michigan Transportation Podcast. I'm Jeff Cranson, and today I'm very pleased to have with me a first-timer on the Transportation Podcast, Brad Williams, Government Affairs Director for the Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, you said first time. I hope it's not last time.
No, you can be a frequent guest. So I specifically wanted you on this week because of your spirited testimony before House Transportation this week on the governor's road bonding plan and why you think it makes sense now, knowing all that you know as a former government affairs liaison for MDOT and somebody that's been at road funding for a long time. You know, give us your take on the whole thing.
Yeah, so you've outed me in a way that I didn't when I was talking to the legislature yesterday as a former MDOTer. But as I said to the legislature yesterday, I've been working at the chamber now for 12 years. And before that, here at MDOT, and before that in the legislature. And so my career has spanned now 20 years, and I feel like I've been talking about road funding for the bulk of that 20 years. And so I was trying to put in context for them, because particularly in the House of Representatives, these are newer members who, have been citizens and engaged citizens, probably more so than your average citizen, but maybe don't know how long this conversation has been going on and the depth of this conversation. That this is, this conversation about road funding is not new, and that we at the Chamber have been supporting different road funding solutions for literally decades. But to put it maybe in a smaller bite-sized history, Governor Snyder came out with a request from the legislature in 2013 for $1.2 billion in new taxes and fees. I would say there's probably been 10 different serious proposals between then and now for new revenues. I think the chamber has been behind every serious proposal that looked at new user fee-based revenue generation between then and now. And there has been very little momentum in the legislature, not for lack of hard work, not for lack of will, from some people, but just very little momentum. And so, Governor Whitmer, in her State of the State, I think, like a lot of us, is shown some exasperation with the lack of momentum, and has taken things into her own hands and asked the State Transportation Commission to use their authority to issue bonds. And in a perfect world, we put out a statement that day. In a perfect world, we wish the legislature would exercise their authority to issue new revenue and generate long-lasting revenue that would fix this chronic problem. But even if they did that, the bonding that the State Transportation Commission took into account and that the governor asked for still makes some sense because of the way the economy is going right now, the way that interest rates are going. Pulling these projects forward and taking projects that otherwise may have been 10-year fixes and making them 20-year fixes and adding new projects onto the 5-year plan really takes these assets that we have and manages them more responsibly.
So without getting into too much of a conversation about term limits, I went over that when I had Bob Emerson and Ken Sikkema on the podcast.
Yeah, they know term limits really well.
Yeah, they had a lot to say about the role that plays in this. Would this be doable if we didn't have term limits?
It's hard to say. I mean, we didn't have term limits for a long time, and it's not like they were chomping at the bit to bring new revenue into the system.
We talk about 4 decades.
But I think it would be easier because you have a little bit more perspective and you've got time to work through these issues and build up some seniority to understand the scope of the problem. I mean, we did some polling that I mentioned in my testimony, and the one thing we found that's frustrating is that voters in Michigan think that there is enough money in state government right now to fix this problem, and we all know that there's not.
Yeah, but if you poll 6-year-olds on whether they want broccoli, what are they going to say?
Well, exactly. And so one of the things that, and I talked about this in my testimony, one of the reasons I attribute this to is because every year at the end of the budget, you see press releases coming out of the Capitol capital from both sides of the aisle. This is not an attack on either side. That we're spending record amounts of money on transportation, and that is true. What they're not saying, though, is that record amounts of money doesn't even come close to solving
Well, yeah,
the
and the
problem.
longer you wait, the more it costs. So, of course, you're spending more, but that's not catching up.
Right, but when we think about why are they sending out these press releases, because they need to get reelected, right? And they're not thinking about anything beyond getting reelected, and they only need to get reelected a few times. And then 6 years later, it's term limited out, and it's not their problem anymore. And so there is not a necessity for the sort of long-term thinking that would be required if we didn't have term limits. So I'm not saying getting rid of term limits is necessarily a panacea. It's not the solution to all of our problems. I mean, look at Washington. They don't have term limits either. And Washington hasn't raised the gas tax or solved the transportation problem in a long time either. So let's not say term limits is going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
But it certainly is part of the issue in my mind.
Craig Thiel of the Citizens Research Council, awesome nonpartisan group that does tremendous research on all kinds of public policy issues,
Yep.
also testified at that same hearing and gave his case against bonding.
Mm-hmm.
Let's listen to that, and I want you to respond to what he says.
There's a legitimate role for bond financing in road construction and maintenance, but that is to accelerate construction, not as a funding source. It's been mentioned before, it's a financing mechanism, not a funding source. Without new revenue stream to finance the debt, government is only borrowing against future revenue. And Michigan's been down this road before. 20 years ago, the Build Michigan program, the State Transportation Commission, issued almost $1.4 billion over a number of years. That money was used to build shiny, smooth roads, sturdy bridges. The state reached its highway condition goals and maintained them for 4 years. Quite an accomplishment. However, without any new ongoing revenue to pay off the bonds, road conditions began to deteriorate as resources simply were not there to pay off the bonds and maintain what was built.
So you heard that.
Yep.
You already knew what he was going to say. One thing that frustrated me was that I think in some of the coverage of that hearing, and certainly in what I heard some lawmakers say afterwards, they heard what he said about why the council doesn't like bonding, but they didn't hear what he said about how we really wouldn't be here if you guys had come up with a sustainable fix. And the governor wouldn't even have to pitch this, or if she did pitch it, she would pitch it as something with a dedicated revenue stream that allows you to advance the projects as you discussed.
Right, and I think, what Craig said is not fundamentally wrong. What we are suggesting is that, yes, this is a financing mechanism, and the perfect solution is for the legislature to continue these conversations about a long-term funding stream. The governor proposed a financing mechanism that is going to allow us to pull projects forward, to take these projects that are most in the greatest need, and solve these problems immediately. But that does not mean that we don't need a long-term funding stream. And if any member of the legislature thinks that just because the governor has proposed this bonding and the State Transportation Commission has agreed with her request, that they're off the hook, and all of a sudden we don't need to worry about a funding mechanism, then I think they're mistaken. And I think that's what Craig is saying, and I think the governor would agree with that, and we certainly agree with that as well. We still need to have a funding conversation. That doesn't mean, though, that this bonding isn't a good idea. It is absolutely a good idea, because if you look at one of the projects that was put on the 5-year plan, a 275 reconstruction, that is taking a project and as I understand it, making a 20-year repair to 275, which is an absolutely vital piece of infrastructure in metropolitan
There's actually
Detroit.
two different segments near I-94. One will be $147 million, and one will be $177 million.
And there
That's
are,
huge.
you probably know the traffic numbers better than I do, Jeff. There are, tens of thousands of vehicles that travel that corridor.
It's among the busiest segments in the state.
Right, and so doing a long-term fix on that and using long-term financing to do that is a prudent use of debt. Our members, who are business owners from across Southeast Michigan, they use debt this way all the time. long-term debt to make long-term capital investments. That's smart business.
Yeah, and I think something else that's been missing from this is there's discussion. People will say, well, how long are the roads going to last? And they'll say, well, this is at least 25 years. Well, that means 25 years until it needs a major rehabilitation. It means like along the way you're going to change your oil, and then maybe you need a timing belt. But
Right.
it's still, the road is still going to be there. It's going to last much longer than 25 years.
Right.
That's been lost in this conversation too.
I think one thing too that is misunderstood that the department has done very well since the last time we did Build Michigan is become a nationwide leader in asset management. Not that asset management wasn't something that the department was focused on 25 years ago, but has become so much better at asset management. And so, when we do this rebuild of 275, I think the department is going to be much more focused on making sure that this rebuild is, that we're doing, maintenance on it from the very beginning, so that that it lasts even longer than if we had done this 25 or 30
Yeah,
years.
explain what that means, because I think a lot of people glaze over when they hear asset management and they think logically, worst first, right? You just fix the worst roads first.
Right. I mean, yeah, the idea behind asset management is that you've got this brand new piece of infrastructure and you start doing minor fixes right away, that you don't let cracks turn into potholes, that if you start to get cracks in it, that you seal those up right away so that more water doesn't seep into it and it becomes part of the freeze-thaw cycle and becomes worse and worse, that you start doing minor fixes as soon as they show up so they don't become larger problems. And you do these minor fixes when they're cheap as opposed to wait until they become
It's a bit of a way you can become a victim of your own success, because if you are big on performance measures and big on asset management and you manage to stretch the money and keep these things fixed, at least, patched up, then it doesn't crumble and people think, okay, you're solving the problem, why do you need more money, right?
Right.
It makes it
Yeah,
difficult.
absolutely.
So going to that point, one of the things that people question, like, where does that money go, and not understanding that we all pay less in taxes on a adjusted for inflation basis than we did in the 50s and 60s, that people forget that, and they take pledges not to ever have any taxes. If that's the case, and if that's your mindset, and if you don't understand that user fees have always been the way we funded transportation from the very beginnings of road networks in the country, then how do we ever get past that conversation?
I think people are starting to understand that, if we want to have nice things, that we have to pay for it. You're never going to get a critical mass of people who stand up and cheer for new taxes. I mean, that's just not the way it's going to be. But more and more people are starting to understand that the services that they come to expect cost money. And I think you're starting to see this around the state. I mean, if you look at local road proposals, they're passing overwhelmingly. And these are property tax questions. I mean, property taxes are the worst taxes.
Right.
No one likes paying property taxes. So if property tax questions for roads are passing 75, 80% of the time across the state, that tells you that gas taxes should be more palatable even still.
My city, Grand Rapids, passed an income tax for streets by an overwhelming margin.
Yeah, and if you think about, I mean, let's turn back the clock just a few years. I mean, if you remember, the legislature passed a small gas tax increase just a few years ago. It wasn't even close to enough to solve the problem.
Well, and they also put in general fund money.
Yeah, but it was a gas tax increase. If you recall, I remember the day before it went into effect, hearing one person grumble about it.
One person.
Yeah. Have you heard anyone say anything since? I mean, I think people are used to the price of gas being so volatile in the last 20 years that I think, some of these things can be folded in without people even recognizing that it happens anymore. And so, I don't want to dismiss the real concerns people have with their budgets, but I think people also understand that good roads, good parks, good schools actually cost money.
Well, I think too, and I should clarify that when I said it was money from income tax diversions that would have gone to the general fund. It wasn't exactly general fund money. Still, long term, most policy people, including the Citizens Research Council, would tell you committing that much money in income tax diverted money to roads is not a good long-term strategy.
Well, and I should note, I mentioned earlier that at the chamber, we've been supportive of just about every serious proposal to raise user fees,
Including 2015's package.
which was really hard.
But was a really good plan, but
yeah,
very hard to explain.
It was really hard to explain. But the exception to that rule was the proposal you just talked about that did raise the gas tax but dedicated general fund revenues, and that was part of the reason behind it. Is we didn't think putting general fund into the roads was a particularly good idea, because we do think user fees should be used to fund roads, and we thought that doing a partial fix that didn't actually solve the problem would only continue to feed into this cynicism that we're seeing from voters that think, as we've seen in our polls, they think that there is enough money in state government to fix the roads because they keep seeing record funding putting into roads, but the roads aren't getting any
That
better.
coverage doesn't help. So one more thing real quickly, where does the chamber stand on this study making its way through the legislature to have MDOT study tolling?
Well, I think we're past the point where we can take options off the table. If the numbers come back and it makes sense, I think we have to look at it seriously. What I've heard preliminarily is that the only stretch of road that might make sense is I-94. You may have more insight into that than I do, being in the inside of this building. I have a lot of questions about it. I think, what I've told people is, people draw the conclusion draw the comparison between the Ohio Turnpike. That's what they know, right? The Ohio Turnpike, of course, was built before the interstate highway system. And so if you need to get across Ohio, that's the only option. So you can't get across Ohio without paying a toll, or very conveniently. Right. But if you want to get from Jackson to Ann Arbor, you can take 94. You also can take Michigan Avenue. There's redundancy. And so I think, you're going to see if you were to toll I-94, there are lots of ways to get around tolling. So that's one concern I would have. The other I would have is that, I think fairly people who live in the I-94 corridor might ask, well, why should I have to be the one who are paying toll for my highway when the people who live in, say, Oakland County, why don't they have to pay a toll for their highway? Why do the people in Grand Rapids who 131 is their highway, why don't they have to pay a toll? I think that's a fair question to ask. I think that's a debate we would need to have.
Absolutely, those are fair questions, and I think the other thing that people need to keep in mind is that the technology is so much better now, and there are things that you can do with tolling that you didn't used to be able to do, so it's not as expensive to implement.
Yeah.
But
now, I think one of the things I think we should explore is, do we want to look at tolling for expansion? In D.C., where they have the hot lanes on the D.C. Beltway, that, I think, is a real area of opportunity for this state. Because, we're talking about $2 billion we need to fix the roads. That doesn't add any new concrete, right? So if we want to mitigate some of the congestion, particularly in our region, by adding new lanes of concrete, that may be an opportunity to toll new lanes of concrete where we need to add it. That, I think, is something we seriously should look at.
Yeah, and I think it cannot be packaged at all as solving the problem. That no matter what happens with this, it needs to be understood that this is just another tool, and this is a helpful tool, but it's not going to be the only solution to this whole thing.
I mean, how many times since November of 2016 have we heard, I don't know about you, have I heard, well, we can solve this all with marijuana tax revenue too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many people who think that there's an easy way out of this, and the simple fact is there's not.
Pot for potholes.
Tolling's not going to fix this. Marijuana's not going to fix this. There's no easy way out of this. We've waited so long that we can't get out of this without noticing.
It's a long-term sustainable solution.
Yep.
That's what we need. Well, Brad, thanks for taking the time to do this. I think we'll definitely sit down and talk about these things again, because we could go on forever.
I could talk about this forever. I've been talking about this for 20 years, so we could talk about it for another 20 years.
Yeah. Okay, thanks again for listening to this week's edition of Talking Michigan Transportation, and I want to give a special thanks to Corey Peedy, who does the sound engineering for the podcast, and to Sarah Martin of MDOT, who does the show's intro and closing.
That's a wrap for this edition of Talking Michigan Transportation. Check out show notes and more on SoundCloud or by subscribing on Apple Podcasts.